I think I was talking to some of you on the lunch line not so long ago. So if we had a disagreement, and I can't remember, you can get back at me now. I find it very enjoyable to be here at Ball State and to be away from the Eastern Seaboard and see what you all are thinking about and doing out here. I came here, Dean, with a good idea of admonishing you about things, and I find out you aren't doing them bad to begin with, so what am I going to do? I seem to have lost it, but my associate at the University of Pennsylvania gave me an article from Business Week in which it said that the strategic planners are no more. And it said that private corporations had discovered that strategic planners who dealt largely with statistics and worked in ivory towers were not assisting their corporations, but were in fact doing the opposite. And that the period in which the idea that you could plan for corporate development and future strengthening primarily through computer printouts and primarily through a special cadre of specially trained planners, many of whom came from consultant firms, was over, and that the planners of the future would be much more involved in direct responsibility for management, and that the policies would emerge from experience with management itself. And I do myself believe that all of you in your career, architects, landscape architects, and city planners, will change the basic nature of your professional practice from that which we old people have been accustomed to, and that all of you will find that the notion of the isolated technician, the isolated professional who comes out of the studio and tells people what to do and really has no responsibility for doing it, is a thing of the past, and architects will take a much more positive role in the development of their buildings. Many architects are actually buying buildings such as old houses, rehabilitating them and so forth, and planners will no longer be able to do what they have in the past. And this, of course, means that you will have to do some rethinking about your career and how you're going to make things work. I was very happy to find here that the condition which exists in most of the schools I go to, under which the city planners are over here, and the architects are over there, and the landscape architects are up here, and they never talk to each other, and in between is a huge void, and that seems not to exist here. So I commend you, and I commend you all for doing that. And I do gather that you really do get together and worry about what you're doing and really cooperate to some degree. Now that you're all happy about that, I hope you're happy, then I have to tell you the other side of it. And this is my basic message to Ball State and my suggestion to the dean and the faculty, that you, uniquely among all planning schools in the United States, will at last arrive at this simple conclusion, which no other has, and therefore you've got a completely virginal territory. That the issue is not primarily that the planners and the architects and the landscape architects get together in a middle ground, which is a term I don't like, and cooperate with each other, and out of that comes urban design, because it doesn't come out of that. And I can tell you from long experience that it doesn't work that way. And that, the fact of the case is that if you are going to do something about cities or towns, and that should be the main concern of every designer, whether he's an architect, he or she's an architect, landscape architect, or a planner, you eventually come to realize that the thing you do in the beginning, when in the undergraduate, where you have a core course that everybody uses, that's great, starts you off in the right direction. Then you go zooming off into your separate tracks, and then the idea is that you come together at the end of your, before graduation, and then between each other you create this central thing. The fact of the case is that urban design does not come out of architecture and does not come out of planning. It is a thing by itself. It's got its own guts, its own structure, and it is not derived from applying principles of planning, and it is not derived from applying principles of architecture. Architects are the ones that have the most difficulty in understanding that, because they are primarily trained to the idea that, number one, they deal with a discrete piece of land. The discrete piece of land resembles a piece of paper, and that instead of being hills and valleys and a whole history on it and so forth and so on, that it's just a blank piece of paper waiting their genius to implant itself in it. And also that it's their primary duty to serve the client. Well, the fact of the case is that the client is never going to get around to asking an architect to do the basic intermediary thing, which is good, gutsy urban design. And the fact of the case is that the planners, at least traditionally, are so rooted in theoretical exercises and in computer printouts that they regard a three-dimensional construct of any kind as being beneath their dignity. And if it really gets built, it probably is no good to start with. Now, in order to attempt to show this, I brought together a slideshow. The slideshow is based on a particular type of technology which I've developed and which depends upon very good equipment. So we are all hoping. And by the way, the music in this case is written by my son. I have two sons, one of whom you may have heard of by the name of Kevin. If any of you has ever seen or heard of Footloose, that's he. And the other son is, nobody goes to the movies, huh? Oh, never mind. The other son is called Michael, and he is the one that wrote the music. So we will hopefully start. Wait till I find this darned, where is it? Oh, I need to put this thing off. And how do I put it off? This is Detroit. I turned it off. Here is the Detroit River in all its pristine glory, and here is downtown Detroit. Now, here comes the architect, the planner, and urban design. It is the true fact that those wonderful blocks of buildings, which once were vibrant downtown Detroit, are fallen on hard times. And somebody had to revitalize the downtown. So Henry Ford II got a hold of the great planner architect John Portman and said, let's revitalize, revive downtown. And what did they do? Now, the fact of the case is that revitalization is not an object. And what they did was to draw the one object which is completely self-centered, which has no capacity to reach out and embrace anything or anybody around it, and in which the energy which it produces goes entirely inward. And there's this energy. And there's its energy energizing and energeticizing, and there is its energy continuing with $500 million to energize and energate. And there is completed and consummated, and not a damn thing happened to downtown. The only thing that happened was that the whole thing is bankrupt. Now, this is a very important lesson. Among other things, you might ask the question, well, where were the city planners? Well, they were in their offices writing reports. And the fact of the case is that this is a very, very serious matter, and that the whole history of Detroit is going to be deeply affected by the design image that was operative in the mind of John Portman, architect planner, in whom Henry Ford trusted. If you do a design which is completely inward-looking and which has no capacity to reach out and animate the area around it, you're going to have economic troubles. So that the consequences is a very sad thing. And what I'm trying to do now is to say that design is not the realm of the architect. You can see that the economic and social future of Detroit is profoundly affected by the fact that this is a circle. Now here it is, the plan of it. in all its inward-looking glory. And here is another plan which is remarkably similar to it. I don't know whether John Portman knows this plan or not, and I don't know whether you know it or not. In fact, how many people here do know what this is a plan of? Well, you ought to if you don't, because it happens to be a very famous building, and I hope the resemblance is startling. And here is John Portman's wonderful Renaissance Center in Detroit, and there's Detroit waiting to be animated and activated, and there's John over in the corner looking at his navel. Well, the building which most closely resembles this is this particular building, and now I think you recognize it. Well, it's great if you're dead. Obviously, for a tomb, the only thing you do if you're dead is to go upward. But if you're trying to have fun, you reach outward, and that didn't do it. And it is true that it didn't do what it was supposed to do. Here it is in all its grandeur as it presents its front to the city that is animating, activating, vitalizing, and re-energizing. And here is the reality of the land is energizing and re-energizing, and that is a parking lot. So that's the negative side of it. Now here is another, this happens to be San Antonio. In San Antonio, they had a river which was polluted, and planners proposed that it should be covered over with concrete, and then it would be a fine parking lot for downtown. Well, some other people had a different view, and what happened was that a walk was built along it, and the WPA put a garden, and it became a beautiful asset to San Antonio, with boats going up and down, gardens, restaurants, and so forth. Now, there's another thing in San Antonio which is called the Alamo. At least my own son has great affection for the Alamo. I don't know whether any of you are in that class or not, but it is a great historical monument. Now comes the thing, the opposite from John Portman, an impulse. Well, it's an impulse. It's a outthrust. It's a desire. It hits its mark. And the Alamo and the Riverwalk of San Antonio are connected. Thank you very much. The reason I did that was because I want to make the point that architecture and planning do not just deal with discrete objects. They deal with a sequence of experience of people who are impacted by architectural forms. And after all, it's very hard to have the idea that music is a no other than a time art. And so by superimposing music with moving through space, through the connections that you saw, hopefully that point's made. This is a diagram which I like because, in a sense, here for the first time, you have objects in infinite space. You could have a sphere of total blackness all around you, and these objects would stand by themselves. And they can be added to by other objects, and indeed further, and then might come something like this. And here what happened was that a series of separate and disconnected elements are brought together into a system and given a center. And this also is a dynamic view of the city, and in this case it happens to be this city, which you probably recognize, and if you don't recognize it yet, you surely will by this picture. This is the Minneapolis, Minnesota, and this is the Idea Center. And here, of course, the business people built the separate bridges connecting the different blocks of the city with no particular pattern like in the beginning. And then the IDS came along and built the great focal center with Philip Johnson as architect, and that gave a focus to the whole thing. And that, of course, is again a dynamic form in which the pattern is extending and growing, because that pattern is not like John Portman's circle, a self-contained and self-defeating one. And I like this. I don't know whether the menu still exists, but I always liked this menu because of the way it feels about being in Minneapolis if you're a Minneapolis. This is another situation, and this is called the language of cities, and this is trying to look at cities not as static or passive series of inert buildings, but rather as a dynamic living human organism, and having in it certain foci and certain thrusts and actions within it rather than the way John Parton saw it. These are designed for Milwaukee Grand Avenue, which I hope you've all seen, and the left-hand one is the Gimbels, and the right-hand one is the Boston department store. And they have their own internal seminal entities, and maybe, again, a reaching out for each other. This sometimes happens even in human relations. And so it goes on, and they're getting closer, and finally a connection and everything springs into life. Some of you may have actually experienced this yourself. And so it doesn't necessarily stop there. It's perfectly possible that it keeps on going. It goes on outward, outward and outward, and because it's there, other things connect onto it, and so you begin to get connections, connections, connections. And so the city, instead of being a series of disparate and unconnected parts which are confusing and disorienting, begins to become a grand total with form and meaning. And so here it is, Grand Avenue. This is without music. This is my friend David, an associate, also walking through this from Gimbel's store, down the corridor and into, across the bridge and into the wonderful historical Plankington building, which you see emerging in the background, built in the 19th century. And here he is, full in the wonderful Plankington building, which before this happened had been very neglected, and it was in very bad shape. And here, as we approach the center feature, we run our eyes vertical and look at the skylight. And there is the skylight, only that's the way it was when it was the visit before the last to the Plankington building, and this is the same skylight now. And so you see what the dynamism of action in a city can do. And it's well worth it, getting all that stuff to get this skylight cleaned up. Here is there is the central feature with a wonderful circle and the wonderful steps going down in this wonderful spiral. And here is old gentleman himself, Mr. Plankington, looking with somewhat bemused at what happened to his wonderful old building, which had been thought obsolete and useless. And so David continues on and goes on into the next sky bridge. And there is the architecture of the Plankington building. We don't have stuff like that anymore because architects can't do that anymore. But we go on into the next part, and this is the beginning of the opening up of the Central Mall. Here, the bank refused to allow the people to put the incorporate their bank into it, so it had to duck back behind the bank. But it kept on unabashed and kept on going around here and there, and people liked dining around here, looking down into the spaces of it, and it was fun to look down and see the pool and the trees in the middle of it, and the way people at last found in the middle of Milwaukee, which they hadn't had before, a great place to be and to enjoy being in. And so the view over the central part of the whole thing, James Rouse was the developer of this, and David continues on his way toward Gimbel's store, where he spent a small fortune. I don't remember what he bought, but it was very constructive. And so the wonderful, wonderful thing about this project is that it has no architecture. This is what you see from the street as this project that you looked at before. And there you see in the background, well, the extreme background is the wonderful old post office, which is the same design as it's the federal building, the same design as the post office in Washington. And it was a rubber stamp of it, by the way. And there is the Plankington building, and then the Horrid Bank that would be part of it is there with its funny looking little projections. And so everything that you saw is all behind it. And that's why it's such a wonderful project. And here is the, by the way, if you don't think so, look at what the modern architects did around that marvelous circle in Indianapolis, which I saw for the first time in my life, with that absolutely awful building, that newest building built there under urban renewal, which ruins the whole circle. And you see there is Gimbel's store, the Plankington building, the old bank, and then the background is the Boston store. And you see it's moving outward just exactly as our diagram, and we get up closer, we see the bridge going across Wisconsin Avenue, and there it is. And you see it hasn't quite met yet, but it will. It'll make contact, and don't worry. And here it is going in the other direction. It goes right across the river and goes over and connects with the people on the other side of the river and brings the energy of the office buildings and so forth into this central place, meeting place, architectural creation for the people of Milwaukee. And downtown Milwaukee was very down on the heel before this happened. And I understand now people from 100 miles away are getting in their cars. They're driving right past all the suburban centers and going the heck down to Grand Avenue, which is what you saw, because they like being there and they like being part of the whole thing. And I'm very happy to say that I gave them the idea for it, and they did build the darn thing. This is the way it was before. You see on the river, I guess it's the Milwaukee River or something or other. And on the right-hand side, the red building is the Gimbel store, and the left-hand side is the Boston store. And then the Plankington building you see with its little plaza in the center of it, sort of cross-shaped. And this is, they're all disconnected buildings, and it didn't work. And now comes, instead of setting up something separate by itself, the idea of penetrating and incorporating this into a concept, a movement system, and that's the design that was worked out with the mall. You see the pink and how it ducked around the bank and how it does that beautiful job, and how this then moved outward because of this energy, because it was not an inward design, it was an outgoing design. It moved outward and across, and here it is within the structure of the downtown, and it will extend way across to the right toward the lake and up to the left, and gives a focal meaning, a connection, an identification point with all these points in Milwaukee, and in the process of doing it, it animates the whole thing. And now we change the subject and come to Philadelphia. And here is the drawing of this urban design for downtown Philadelphia, which I say in most places doesn't exist at all, and which is not the usual product of the planner or of the architect, in which it's a three-dimensional thing. And you see the gardens of the Greenway on the right-hand side going through Society Hill, and it's a multi-level thing. The yellow part of it is a continuous under the street footway. The streets are shown, and then the white connecting the department stores is above the street. The railroads are woven in, the parking, and the subways, and the buses, and the river and the river developments, and it's all a continuous integrated thing in 3 dimensions, which is the urban design plan. This is the 1900 map of the area beneath the street, the subway. In the left-hand side, the square is our 1870 City Hall, which is big and made of granite. And there is the 8th, 11th, 13th, and 15th Street subway stations. Now came the Broad Street subway moving vertically north-south, and off from it to the left goes the suburban station railroad tracks, which were tied together. This was about 1910, or 1915. And I came along as the planner and said, in view of the fact that 70% of the people who come downtown come by underground anyway, commuter railroad, which is underground, or subway, which is underground, why don't we build a beautiful garden open to the sky, a people street 3 blocks long, at the same level as where you arrive in your subway cars. So instead of coming downtown and being greeted by a human sewer with graffiti on the wall, you look through a glass window and the sun shining on gardens, fountains, flowers, and trees, and that'll make you feel good. And that will make you want to come downtown. And by the way, the sun won't mind shining 20 feet further down. And so therefore, in the red heat of inspiration, I came up with this idea, and there you see it at the left appearing. Just build one level beneath the street, the same level as these underground transit systems, a series of gardens, a people street open to the sky, which will animate and activate this part of the city and give it a good way to get around without being run over. Well, in 1947, when I conceived of this idea, there weren't many things like this around. And in 1952, when I announced it, the good people of Philadelphia were moderately horrified. Some of them were stunned, and none of them understood it at all. And however, being a persistent sort of fellow and hanging around and doing lots of drawings and things of it, finally it did get built. But it got built in a fragmented way, and you will see now a dissolve in which you change from my conception in red to what got built in white. And you will see a case where a simple organized concept got fragmented and a whole series of more limited objectives were met in a more chaotic manner. This is the way it actually is now. But despite the fact that it was a disappointment to me because I wanted something broader and simpler, it did have a tremendous effect on revitalizing the area here. And so I became worried because there was a tendency for all the energy of the development of downtown Philadelphia to move continuously in a westerly direction, leaving a sea of blight behind in its wake. And the planner, if he were a good planner, would have put his computer into operation. He would have figured out the speed within which the center of gravity of economic activity in Philadelphia moved in a westerly direction, so many inches per minute. And then, if you wanted to do a plan for 1990, he would only have to project that direction to 1990. He would then have his focal center of the downtown at that time, and then he could plan for that. And we said, to hell with that. We said, it's wrong, it's wasteful, it's inhuman and undesirable, and we will not only resist it, we will stop it, we will grab it by the horns, we'll pull it back in the opposite direction, and we will bring it back to the river. In order to do that, we had to inject some sort of image or symbol which would be in that direction. So here is what I came up with. Well, actually, this isn't what I came up with. This is what Skidmore, Owings, and Merrill, Walter Netsch came up with when he was in his diagonal period. And that's why those cow otters are there. They are wonderfully irrelevant to Philadelphia's acerbic and aesthetic orthogonal system. Does anybody know why that light suddenly went on up there? It's awful. Turn it off, please. Or shut the door, because I don't like it. Outside the whole, thanks. Well, Skidmore and Merrill did a good subject for it, but they didn't stay, and John Bauer came back again, and this is what John did. He reorganized it and got back into the, you see, it's actually went right back to my 47 idea for Penn Center. It's a simple people street, open to the sky, although it's got a glass roof over it, and extending for 4 blocks and connecting the department store cluster at the right, which was endangered, with the business center to the left. And it demonstrates what I mean by saying there's got to be a urban design idea, and this is a clear example. Its purpose was to avoid the westward movement, to create new energy, and to connect the department store complex with the customers to the left. And it was indeed a large-scale and scary proposal. In fact, when I first put it out in the newspaper in, I think, 1957, after the vice chairman of the City Planning Commission had said that East Market Street was becoming a row of empty warehouses. And that got huge banner headlines in the newspapers. East Market Street, empty warehouses. Well, I knew the value of a symbol, and that was a symbol, an image, and I knew it was awful. And so I said, okay, Harry, I'll take you on, but I won't take you on in your territory. I'll take you on in my territory. I'm not going to call a press conference and say, oh, heck, it isn't going to be. It's going to be pretty. You can imagine the headlines you would have gotten on that. And so instead, I simply went to the drawing board, did a drawing, tearing down all the stores on the north side of Market Street for 4 blocks, putting in beautiful lower level gardens and streets and upper level walkways, and it went in the paper. And all of a sudden, wham, socko, all those business leaders, department store presidents that hadn't paid any attention to me before, they suddenly paid some attention to me. In fact, they sent an emissary to me. And they said, Bacon, we, the establishment, have concluded that you have lost your mind. We have concluded that you are no longer worthy to be director of the Planning Commission, and you have no understanding of the value of the dollar. But at last we made contact. You remember the contact things? Well, they spent so long in telling me how bad my idea was that they finally got tired of it. And then I said, okay, let's drop the whole thing, but couldn't we get at least a little something out of it? And they said, hey, wait a minute, that's not big enough. But anyway, like in Aikido, if any of you does Aikido, you don't get your partner head on and oppose directly. You step to one side and they come over on your side. Well, anyway, the consequence was that was 1957. In 1977, the first element got built, and the same identical people who had sent the message to me congratulated each other on having had the idea when they cut the ribbon, and they having spent their own money for it, by the way, or somebody else's money, but at least they got the money for it, and they never mentioned me at all. And that is an indication of the power of an idea. And here is the consequence. You see in this dissolve, you see the red heat of inspiration going through purple into the blue light of the future, but you see a little piece of it actually got built over on the right-hand side. And there's a little piece of it built on the left-hand side, a little piece of it on the right-hand side. The piece that got built was tiny, just a little project, a block big. However, it perfectly fitted in to the very much larger concept of the whole idea. And so what happened? You see the form at the right is sort of like a flashlight or a hose or a pistol or something. It's a projectile. It has a directional thrust to it. It's not a circle where everything expires inside of it. So what happened? You guessed it. It is extended. And there's Gallery 2. And that is actually built now. And it is a fine thing. And it's coming up to the Reading Terminal. And then there's going to be a convention center and a new 1,300-room hotel. And so there is what's going to happen. And so, incrementally, bit by bit, the whole concept of the whole thing got built. And it's not a question of Jane Jacobs saying that all big plans are bad, only do little things, or Rouse saying you have to do only big things. It's a question of having a clear idea which is structurally functional, involves parking, movement, people, excitement, retail, and then it being once there, it means that the action which takes place animates it. Now here's a view looking from City Hall Tower to the west of downtown Philadelphia in 1952. That seemed like a very short time ago to me, but it probably doesn't to you. On the right-hand side, you see the suburban station building there beside the Insurance Company North America. On the left-hand side, the only tall building in this whole area west of Broad Street, except for the storage warehouse in the back, is the Fox Theater. Now, this was the concept in 1947 for this area, done by architects Oscar Stoneroff and Louis Kahn. You see the suburban station building in the City Hall Tower there. And they, being good architects, said, well, this is a good site for us to exercise our genius. So they saw the site as being a series of nice rectangles of clean white paper. So they did 5 buildings or 6 buildings, all of which were nice and had to do with the nice forms on clean white paper. I saw it very differently. I said, let's look at it with X-ray eyes and see under the ground. And if we do that, we will see something quite different. So I saw vibrating through the whole thing, the subways, the subway surface, the Market Street subway, the Broad Street subway, and the railroad tracks coming in to the left. So I said, why don't we build an underground garden as I described? And there it is with a tree in it, trees in it. And I said, if 1 garden, why not 2 gardens? And if 2 gardens, why not 3 gardens? And so here is 3 gardens. And what came out of that is a people street. It's a whole way to move the whole length of the property from the trains to the center city. And therefore, by the way, it's much better real estate exploitation because the railroad gets the benefit of all the people moving linearly, because it's much easier to go from one direction to the other on the underground street because you've got no traffic crossing it. And the skyscrapers in north-south direction And that was the concept. Well, it was too rich for the blood of Philadelphia at the time, but it inseminated itself into their minds. And that's one of the things, the movies that we did show, how you get a shared community experience. Well, here is the way it worked. Here is looking from City Hall Tower on a model. And here again, the earth is transparent. And you see the subways moving through there, and then the underground railroads and the passageways. And you see the gardens. And if you look at the right-hand circle, you see now what happens in the dissolve. Well, you see very clearly that what is being built is clearly derivative of the underground form of the structure. And again, the underground gardens that are there, and now you see that shows how easy it all is. But at least I hope it makes it clear that the form of the buildings and the plazas and the open spaces are derived from the earth and what was in the earth and a whole complex of functional systems, and it is not the imposition of individual arbitrary structures. And the consequence of all this was an enormous revitalization of this area, because you compare this view, which is identical with the first one you saw from City Hall Tower, with the tracks, the building at the right, and the you just see there the Fox building at the left, barely visible before it was torn down. And so, therefore, it created a problem, which was, I spoke of before, of reversing the westward trend. So we look directly overhead, and here is Philadelphia's first city planner, and very definitely a good one, William Penn, looking back in the opposite direction where he landed in 1682 at the Delaware River at the end, and here he sees a sea of blight, and getting worse and worse and worse, and the prognostication is worse and worse. The Reading terminal, the great Reading shed, is in the foreground. The PSFSS is to the right, and then in the background, the white building with the square windows in it is Strawberries and Clothier's department store. Well, had to get an image going, because images are a very potent political force. So here is the image of Market East, a connected system of shops and ways to walk and new towers. Looking at it, below, taking the upper structure off. Above the street, there's a continuous series of footways. There's an original concept shown in pink going over top of the streets, and as you look at the level below the street level, the streets go through the area, and down below are openings into the lower level, and now we remove the Reading Railroad also. We see the whole continuity below the street, 4 blocks long, 5 blocks long, all connected, the pink showing the way you walk through it. To the left-hand side is the new commuter railroad station for the connected suburban system. On the right-hand side, the near station is 11th Street in the subway, and in the distance you see the 8th Street station, and waving through the whole thing is a series of ways to walk through the gallery. And so we have created a new people street under which people flow under controlled conditions and separated from traffic. And beneath the whole thing is the real guts of it. This is the commuter rail on the left, the subway on the right, and in the center a great truck terminal, 4 blocks long, with an opening well out of this congested area for all the servicing of all the structures, not on the curb but separated on the street. Here is the way it looks. The model, this was the image of the conception of the architect, not a self-contained atrium, but a people street open to the sky, and here again is the easy way that you do it. There's the way it really is. And here is the way it looks. And you see at last the actual floor of the city is developed one level beneath the street. And so here it is. And I may say people love it. And people from all parts of the region meet here. And for the first time, they have a sense by rubbing elbows together or anything else they like to rub, that they are in fact a part of a diverse society, and that there are many different kind of people in that society. And so there will grow up a generation which will be very aware of the fact that this is true. And it all came about because of a visual image which was related to a larger structure. Now you say, well, that's too big for this kind of area. We don't have subways or any of that stuff. So here is Society Hill. This is the drawing I made in Society Hill in 1947 for the Better Philadelphia exhibition. The right-hand upper one is the Franklin Square. The left-hand upper one is the Washington Square with the original William Penn plan. Diagonally is from the Washington Square is Independence Hall, and then the mall going up to Washington Square. And I designed a series of footways through the middle of the block, not along the street, connecting together the different historical monuments shown in black. Well, that was my design in 47, but you see, it is not like the Portman plan. It is not a contained thing. It's an outward-reaching thing. So what happened? That's the way it grew by 57, and there are the three Pei Towers, and here is a more contemporary view of it. But you see, here is an entity. It's a clear, definite entity. It's not a policy plan. It's not a statistical printout. It's not an architect's design for a building. It's a perfectly clear idea of a form of spaces and buildings in relationship with each other, connected and sensing and bringing a sense of order, of orientation and environment and meaning and to the whole area. And it has been the reason that this whole area, which was in the path of the downtrend, has tremendously revitalized itself. And here is a view not so long ago of Independence Hall. This would have been taken in the 50s. And you see in the middle of a very, very deteriorated area, and this is a more contemporary view of the same building. And in direct consequence of this, three great corporations, each of which had decided to move the country, changed their mind. 15,000 jobs were saved for the area. There's Roman Haas International Headquarters, put there because of this public intervention. Now, here is the way Locust Street looked not so long ago, and here is a more contemporary view. Notice the building at the left, that's a restored historical structure. And in the background, you see the columns of the Second Bank of the United States, designed by William Strickland in 1830. And one of the things I did was to pull the influence of these wonderful architectural elements into the center of this structure and gave you a sense of orientation to them, which otherwise they wouldn't have had. And now we go out to the street and turn to the right, and there is the street the way it was not so long ago. And this is called Locust Street, and here is a somewhat more contemporary view of exactly the same street. And those are Yoming Pei townhouses at the end, which are put there, and in consequence of this. And in the background, if you could see them, are the Pei Towers, which are the symbolic focus here. Everywhere we turn 90 degrees, we give a reward because you're walking through the area. And so we go down to the courtyard in front of that round window, and we turn 90 degrees to the right. And here is what we saw only a short time ago. We look at it now, and this is a more contemporary view of the same location. And so that it's an intervention with a clear purpose, with a clear technique, and with the enormously powerful effect of an image. And here, we make the point that the whole thing does, in fact, have an underlying systematic, sequential series of movements, of architectural articulations of movement systems, that this plan, which looks very vast, and in fact is actually almost all of it in being now, that it proves that if you do have a concept which has this degree of sharpness, and which is articulated with this degree of definiteness, that the tumultuous economic, social, and political series of apparently disconnected acts by disconnected interests that form up the present United States can, in fact, coalesce and jointly produce a city of harmony, of system and order, and what is very much alive. Thank you.
Mr. Bacon has said that he's willing to entertain a few questions.
I would go even further. I'm willing to entertain any type of attack you would like to try. I don't expect to get away with all that. Yes?
In Philadelphia, going with the underground system, what do you do in other streets?
I believe I've heard that question before. One of the very, very important things to do is to avoid adopting a fashionable cliche of thought without really carefully looking into the matter. Somebody said it's horrible because down there it's all separated. It's where all the people are down there. I mean, not all the people, but vast thousands and thousands of people are walking up and down the New People Street, going from place to place, completely happy. Why in the hell shouldn't they? It's a street completely separated from traffic. It's got no fumes from cars and so forth. And originally, the original streets were for people and horses, which was great, but with automobiles. Well, anyway, the fact of the case is that Market Street at the street level is more animated than it was before we started, because the grand total, we got many more people in the area than we had before. And so don't be afraid of stuff like that. Go ahead and do it. But this is a new concept. It's a street. And it's a wonderful street. It's open to the sky. It's beautifully landscaped. It's filled with people in all kinds of weather. It's accessible from the mass transportation. And it's given people a new sense of they're part of a really vital and live community. Well, I hope you aren't going to, but if you're going to drop me off at that, I'm going to make a couple more comments because at supper, I'm going to repeat this. At supper, I brought this out, that as director of the City Planning Commission in Philadelphia, I had a policy that I would never stand up in public and oppose the policy of the mayor and his cabinet, because I was part of his administration, and I didn't approve of having a whole series of dispersed people going off on their own. So how in the world did I ever get anything like this done? Well, I did not sit in on cabinet except in the end of my 21 years, so I couldn't influence the cabinet or the mayor directly. Well, the answer is very simple, and I advise you to do it. By the way, what I'm really doing with you is to share the technique, so that you all can get your own ideas carried out. It doesn't matter whether you like mine or not. If you don't like people down in nice people streets, why put them out on wherever you like them. But be sure you do it. The answer to how I did it was very simple. I simply dealt with a future which was farther removed into the misty future than the mayor was interested in. So he would worry about next year and maybe 2 years, and maybe even 3 years after that. But 5 years, 10 years, oh, that's ivory tower stuff. Do whatever you want. So I did whatever I wanted and how. And I laid the thing out with such clarity and through the devices of models and newspaper articles and speeches that when the mayor and his cabinet in retinue in their grandeur marched up to that particular year, I'd already staked the whole darn thing out. And they had a strange tendency to walk down the paths that I laid out for them. And it worked, and so try it. Doesn't anybody really have any?
There is a.
Oh, good. What is it? Could you hear that?
We can't hear very well because of all the new
It's,
changes.
I've changed my ideas about historic preservation. I've always been in favor of historic preservation. Now, I guess your question was, in view of the fact that there were the high towers of the pay towers that you don't like, is that what you're saying? Oh, goodness, yes, goodness, yes. You certainly have a jugular vein sense. About the fact that I was in favor of tearing down City Hall? Who was that? Why, that's marvelous. Yeah, it's very distressing to me, but I have to stand before you and tell you I do make mistakes. And that certainly was one of the more grand ones I made. When I was in school, in your shoes, I made a plan for the area around there, and I showed the total elimination of City Hall Tower and all. And I did improve gradually. And you saw in this particular model, City Hall Tower was left, but everything else was gone. And I really seriously did espouse that at one point. And most assuredly, in terms of historic preservation, I've changed my view on that. And I can freely confess that that was a staggering example of unmeasurable stupidity. Next question. But of course, basically, preservation of the historical areas is the thing. And in the case of the Market East area, the whole wonderful train shed of the Reading Terminal and the wonderful head house were going to be destroyed because nobody could find any economic use for them. But the fact that we did, in fact, take down all the frontage adjacent to them means that the economic energy was there to spend a tremendous amount of money to get rid of the excrescences that had destroyed the original arches and their whole wonderful grandeur, and that the station and the old building will be saved because of the consequence of the destruction of some of the buildings around it, but in the process of doing it, bring the economic energy back to inspire investors to save it. Did you?
You began with the example of Detroit, something that did not save the city. Do you have any suggestions for that particular situation?
Well, I think that well, of course, my answer to it would be that they just plain have to change their mindset. I think that the way in which people think is the most important part of the whole thing, and that's really the main message I want to get at, that as long as you think in terms of individual and discrete objects, you are going to get a Detroit. And even in the proposal that they made for a new retail center downtown, they were thinking so much in terms of a suburban shopping center that they put a thing there with retail in the middle of it, with a sort of a fortress wall around it, and they put the parking on the roof, and they cleared a whole area around it for the ramps going up to the roof, and therefore they totally destroyed the connection with the few shops that were across the way. And that they would just have to change their whole thinking and think in terms not of discrete projects, but in terms of connections. And everything I did was to try to show you what it happens when you really think in terms of connections, and that you not only make very pleasant ways to move, but you open up a whole new vision, awareness, public awareness of the nature of an area. And you saw in Society Hill how I deliberately used a whole series of historical monuments that were pretty well buried, and I pulled the awareness of them together in a very simple way into a perceptual relationship. And you saw in the case of Grand Avenue in Milwaukee how it brought these things together that had been separated. Because they were brought together, it suddenly came into life. And I think that that is the answer. Of course, any city and any state is going to keep on going unless it dies altogether. And so if there were anybody there that was able to do it, anybody here from Detroit? If any is, yeah, why don't you go back and fix it up? Yes. Yes, I think they're into the type of thinking very, very much. And in his own book, Portman said that he regarded the area around as hostile. And in my book, Design of Cities, I have developed in great length the consequences of whether you regard your environment as hostile or whether you regard it affectionately. It just changes everything completely. And of course, every environment has some elements of hostility and some elements of support. But it, of course, was totally wrong to symbolize that that was the attitude toward the environment. So the environment responds as was indicated in that. And if you're going to do anything in this whole situation, you have to have some thrust. You have to have some willingness to put your neck on the line, to do something which is not popular at the time. And every single project I put out was excoriated in the press when it was the press said it was terrible when it started, even including Society Hill. So that you have to have the courage to have faith that the environment, in the degree that it is hostile, will turn around. And Otherwise, and that's the reason, Dean, the reason that it bothers me so much that planners run around talking about problems. Oh, this is perfect for your question. I tell you, if you think you are a problem solver, what you're going to do is to make problems. You're going to spawn problems like rabbits spawn babies. It is absolutely wrong to think that the function of a planner or an architect is to solve a problem. And if you do that, you're going to create worse problems in your solution. The thing that you are doing is restoring vital energy, restoring holistic health, restoring joy, restoring the holism of the whole thing. And you must, every step of the way, feel that from the bottom of your guts, and in everything you say and every word you use reflects that. Does that mean just, yeah? Well, you've expressed your viewpoint on it, that's clear. Why, if you are referring to that article by Jonathan Barnett, I don't know if anybody ever read it, Jonathan Barnett said, among other things, that I was not interested in power. Of course, regulatory controls are important. However, they have been violently misused by the planning profession, and I think that the whole Jonathan Barnett article was reprehensible in the sense that he said the only answer to it is regulatory controls. Well, in the first place, for God's sakes, you can regulate till you're blue in the face, but until somebody comes in with a positive proposal, your regulation doesn't do any good at all. There's nothing to even regulate. And to write off the whole creative aspect of it is what makes me sick. And computer printouts or even rational thinking doesn't help that one particle. You got to get out and do something. You've got to attract people in. Well, I'm making the assertion, and I hope it's clear by these, that the positive image is incredibly forceful in pulling in the developer. The second part of it is that the nature of the controls, if you do have a strong image, and you just, for instance, take the whole thing in Milwaukee, because then we don't have to talk about Philadelphia, of the connection of the Boston store with Gimbels. All of a sudden, the whole thing falls into place. And if you approach that from regulatory controls, you never get anything. And the nature of the controls you have to do when that idea is what's going are entirely different. And I think that most controls written are much too limiting. And for instance, you look at that whole thing in Indianapolis around the circular monument, the monument circle or whatever it is. If you get down to what really was needed there, should have been an image there of what people were driving at, and all those modern buildings wouldn't have looked so irrelevant and insensitive to that situation. So, of course, I'm in favor of sensible controls, and I wanted very much to have a control in Philadelphia to control the height limit. I always did, although Barnett said that I didn't. He was just wrong. But I couldn't get that one. But I'm saying in general that the notion that that's the whole story is ridiculous. There was some... Hart Plaza in Detroit? Yeah. Well, I think Hart Center is marvelous, absolutely marvelous. And in our movie, by the way, I do hope you get our movies. In our movies, we make a main feature of Hart Center, and we don't really do very bad even with Renaissance Center in our movie, unfortunately. But it's a double tragedy because if the Renaissance Center had embraced Hart Center and there'd been a synergistic interrelationship, it would have doubly strengthened each other. And as it is, to get from Art Center to Renaissance Center, I don't know how in the world you do it. I literally, of course, the circle is the most disorienting form in the world. And I went to a convention in Renaissance Center, and I never could find even the room where our meetings were, because you get off the elevator, you're in a total circle. There's no indication of where the south, northeast, or the river, anything else is put on the river. You can't even know you're on the river the entire time you're there. And I walked one time all the way around it twice before I could get out of the darn thing. But, and of course, the message is also very serious. I wonder if I made it at all. That the ghastly failure of Renaissance Center, which was done by the highest level business executives, the highest level architects, and presumably the highest level planners, was because the fundamental design image was totally wrong. All the numbers added up, all the statistical analyses, and all that stuff. But the fundamental concept of the design image, and it was the exact opposite of what I spoke of in answer to the question about what should we do, where the whole thing is motivated by this sense of the holistic aspect of what you're dealing with. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I will remind you, we will be having a reception over at the Kitzelman Center on West University. We'll start there as soon as we can get the wine and the goodies over there.